Chapter 497. Ha, Guaning, you are actually very smart. Do your job well. Teacher is getting old and will retire one day. When that time comes, the Ministry of War will be under your control. Kuang Yi was so happy that he couldn't help but say what was on his mind. Guaning, who was still listening to his teacher's teachings, became excited when he heard this. This was the first time his teacher talked to him about his future. In the past, he thought that Kuang Yi only cared about serving the country and didn't think about personal matters. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that he didn't want to express it. Kuang Yi was almost 70 years old. How many more years would he be in charge of the Ministry of War? When he retires, he would arrange for his trusted aides to take over. This was human nature. At that time, it would be time for him to rise to the next level. Thank you, teacher. Guaning stood up and bowed in gratitude. Ha. Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. It seemed that from this moment onwards, the southern Ming Empire had regained its former prosperity and power. The news was still being passed around and had not reached Nanjing yet. However, when the news reached there, especially after the emissary of Jiaoji met with Zhu Qizhen, it would definitely make Emperor Yingzong, who had not been doing well recently, happy. However, these people didn't know that their happiness was for nothing. Everything that was impossible in their eyes was possible in Yang Chendong's hands. They had underestimated the Duke of Loyalty. Jiaoji Country, Beatty City. 9 days had passed since Hong Jin and Ruan Chunqing agreed on the agreement. In these 9 days, more than 20,000 Han people had arrived at Beatty City. Among them, there were hundreds of Jiaoji spies who were hiding among them. They were dressed like the Han people. In addition, they had lived together for many years, so it was easy to disguise themselves. According to Ruan Chunqing, there were at least 10,000 Han people rushing here. There were also many cities that were still mobilizing because they were too far away. All in all, Ruan Chunqing was very proactive in this matter. His actions seemed to be very fast. However, Jiaoji wasn't a small country. It was impossible to complete this matter in 10 days. This way, it would be able to stall for time. Yang Chendong had long seen through Ruan Chunqing's thoughts. He didn't point it out because he also needed time to prepare for the battle. With the Han people entering the city, it would be easier for them to conceal their military objectives. As for whether or not there were spies from the Jiaoji nation among the 20,000 Han people who had already entered the city, Yang Chendong did not care. After all, these people were going to be sent to Ryukyu Island. At that time, no matter who you are, after studying and living there, you will become a resident of Crimson City. On the surface, Yu Qian was in charge of the management of Crimson City. However, he was more in charge of managing the people's livelihood and the development of various factories. In fact, he was still implementing military control among the people. If one had to describe it, it was a bit like when China was established in the 60s. Every outsider who entered would be strictly checked. Even if you were a Han person, you would be disrupted after entering the city. Yang Chendong was playing this game. Under such a policy, Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, the militia, and even the children's regiment, as well as the residence committee, if anyone tried to do anything, they would be caught and dealt with. Even wearing a big hat on the streets was a common thing. It wasn't worth making a fuss about. Under such an atmosphere, no matter where these 20,000 Han people came from, they would only be on the same side when they arrived at Ryukyu Island. In fact, the moment these 20,000 people entered Beatty City, they were under military control. Then, they were escorted out of the city by Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers to Chu-Yi City. At the seaside not far from Chu-Yi City, the Yangtze Navy's ship was already waiting there. On the ship, not only were there large amounts of firearms and ammunition produced by Crimson City's arsenal, there were also 50,000 Han people. These 50,000 Han Chinese were all young and active members who had performed outstandingly on Ryukyu Island. They were selected by various units and departments. They would become the backbone of the Jianghu country in the future. They would lead the people here to build a new Crimson City. Of course, this so-called building was not really building a modern city. Instead, it was a transfer of management and governance. In other words, it was the continuation of Yangtze's new territory. This was also an expansion from the island to the mainland. This was the first expansion, and there was no prior experience. In order to achieve a better goal, these 50,000 people were only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch, each with 50,000 people. With these 150,000 people as the foundation, and some Lingfeng soldiers stationed here in the future, stabilizing the territory of Jianghu would not be a problem. In truth, Yang Chendong wanted to send more people out from the island. However, these 150,000 youths were already enough to cause Crimson City to suffer. After all, what Ryukyu Island lacked the most was manpower. Being able to squeeze out these 150,000 people was because Yang Chendong had given a strict order, and his subordinates had no choice but to obey. If it had been someone else who had given this order, Yu Qian and the others would have been able to provide 20,000 to 30,000 people. Now, out of the first batch of 50,000 people, other than leaving behind 2,000 people in Chu-Yi City as the backbone to start changing the living conditions there, the remaining 48,000 people were carrying all kinds of food, drinks, and ammunition towards Beidai City. There are still too few people. A long sigh sounded out. This naturally belonged to Yang Chendong. It had been 4 years since he had come to this world. He had been working hard to reach this scale. In the eyes of others, this might be considered very impressive. However, compared to the grand goal in his heart, it was still too far away. If he had 100 million people, even if it was only 20 million people, he would dare to go to Japan and completely occupy it. He would even dare to go to the southwest and southeast of the Great Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, there were less than 1 million people in Crimson City. Most of them were from conquering the first Shang Dynasty. Otherwise, the 150,000 people in front of him would be enough to make him worry. With a sigh, he thought that he still needed to encourage the people of Crimson City to have more children. Although he had done a series of encouraging measures before, many factories and land needed manpower. Some of the local women had no choice but to participate in farming. However, now that the people of Jianghu were continuously sent to Ryukyu Island, those women could be idle. With them around, as long as the incentives were right, there was no need to worry about a large increase in the population. Turning his thoughts back, Yang Chendong raised his head and asked Tiger's Mane, "Is Niatong's 2nd Regiment in place?" "Young master, the day before yesterday, Commander Nya took the 2nd Regiment's Lingfeng and 10 battalions of naval auxiliary soldiers and headed towards Zhejiang Prefecture's coastline. If I'm not mistaken, they should be preparing to take action." Yang Chendong nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Regiment Commander Nya that after conquering Zhejiang County, don't rush to join us. Continue to send troops out of Sunan County and take it down first. If we need help here, let him know." In other words, there was no need for any reinforcements. With just these 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to take down Jianghu County. Hearing this, Tiger's Mane nodded, "Yes, young master. I will inform Regiment Commander Nya of your orders. But can we really take down Jianghu County with just us? Whether it is the military strength or the territory, it is far greater than Zhejiang County and Sunan County combined." Only Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Chendong's side for the longest time, dared to ask such a question. If it was someone else, they would only need to carry out the order. But his considerations were also very reasonable. Conquering a country was one thing, conquering it was another. If they didn't have enough military strength, they wouldn't be able to do it. Yang Chendong first smiled, but he didn't immediately answer this question. Instead, he casually pointed outside the door. Following the direction of his finger, Tiger's Mane saw Hong Jin standing respectfully outside, waiting for Yang Chendong to summon him. Isn't there General Hong Jin? After casually saying this, Tiger's Mane suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, young master means to use him as a general, and then, that's right. Yang Chendong directly interrupted Tiger's Mane's words and said with a smile, that's right. There is a saying, to control the barbarians with the barbarians. We can form a Jiaoji mercenary army and let them be in charge of the security of Jiaoji County. Compared to us, they are more familiar with this place, right? Yang Chendong was currently thinking about the Japanese army in the future. He had to admit that the Japanese army that invaded China didn't have enough military strength, so he came up with this idea. And it was because of this that he almost completed the act of a snake swallowing an elephant. Since others can use it, he can naturally use it too. In addition, he can also send some troublemakers to Resin City. In this way, without those troublemakers, Hong Jin's pressure will be reduced a lot. After Tiger's Mane understood Yang Chendong's intention, he looked at the young master with admiration. He really didn't know how the young master's brain worked. How could he come up with so many good ideas? Just like using the Jiaoji mercenary army to govern the Jiaoji people, he wouldn't have thought of this even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't that Tiger's Mane was stupid. It was just that no one had used this method before, so naturally, he wouldn't have thought of it. Chapter 498. Well, go and wake Hong Jin up. Yang Chendong said casually, then turned around and sat back on the big chair. In front of Tiger's Mane, he could do anything he wanted, but in front of a surrendered general like Hong Jin, he had to maintain his dignity. What was a superior? Not only did he have an imposing manner, but he also had to learn all kinds of methods and use all kinds of environments to enhance his imposing manner. Once he did it well, it would give his subordinates a lot of psychological pressure. When he issued an order, there would naturally be no second opinion. Not long after Yang Chendong sat down, Hong Jin came in under Tiger's Mane's lead. As soon as he entered the room, Hong Jin knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and said in a very respectful voice. Subordinate Hong Jin greets Duke of Loyalty. As a surrendered general, Hong Jin was very clear about his identity. Not only in front of Yang Chendong, but even in front of some ordinary mercenary officers, he was very respectful. Therefore, for a long time, no one really made things difficult for him. Originally, under the leadership and teaching of Yang Chendong, the mercenaries were very particular about the equality between officers and soldiers. Even if a soldier joined the army, as long as he was not too arrogant, no one would make trouble for him. If Hong Jin's attitude was slightly better, it would be even worse to say that no one would want to make things difficult for him. Yes. Seeing Hong Jin kneeling in front of him so respectfully, Yang Chendong nodded and then said casually, "You did a good job." Hearing the praise, Hong Jin, who was kneeling there, felt happy. However, he still said cautiously, "It's all thanks to the Duke of Loyalty's good teachings." "Alright, there's no need to call me Duke of Loyalty. You're my man, so just call me Sixth Young Master from now on." Yang Chendong slowly straightened his body as he spoke. The change in address meant that he had been initially accepted by Yang Chendong. Hong Jin, who was overjoyed, quickly kowtowed to the ground and said, "Yes, Sixth Young Master." Yang Chendong could understand the slight tremor in Hong Jin's voice. After all, even though the Hong family had some power, it was still far from the Yuan, Chen, Li, Fan, Huang, and Pan families. It could be said that at this moment, Hong Jin really wanted to be understood and recognized. Yang Chendong, who fully understood this, wanted to give Hong Jin a chance to stand out. "Hong Jin, have you ever thought of putting down the things you're doing and doing something else?" The work at hand was to settle the Han people who came from all parts of Jiaoji. Even though this job didn't seem like much, most of the Han Chinese who came here were in a daze. Many of them didn't even know why they were here. They were all forced to come here by the Jiaoji army. These people didn't have any feelings of gratitude or excitement. Even so, Hong Jin was happy to do these things. In his opinion, some things wouldn't have much effect if he didn't do them at the beginning, but as time passed, as long as he treated these Han people well, they would eventually remember him. Who knew when one or two of these people would stand out? At that time, if they were willing to take care of him, that would be the greatest reward. It was precisely because he had such an idea in his heart that when he suddenly heard Yang Chendong say that he was not allowed to take care of this matter, panic appeared on his face. He didn't know if he did something wrong, or if he did something that Yang Chendong wasn't satisfied with. Therefore, his first reaction was to kowtow to the ground again. Then, he continued to explain, "Sixth young master, this lowly one does things in a rough manner. If there is anything that is not to your liking, please forgive this lowly one. This lowly one knows his mistakes and will definitely correct them." Mistake? What mistake did you make? Even with Yang Chendong's intelligence, he didn't know what to do with Hong Jin's actions. Hearing that there was no blame in Yang Chendong's words, Hong Jin slowly raised his head with a puzzled look. Just as Hong Jin raised his head, Yang Chendong's voice sounded, "This young master wants to give you a chance to stand out, a chance to bring glory to your Hong clan. How about this, you form an army, and you will be the general. The number of people should be around 30,000. Other than the advanced firearms, this young master will provide you with any other weapons. How about it?" Before Yang Chendong could finish his words, there was a heavy thud on the ground. Looking carefully, it was the sound of Hong Jin kneeling and kowtowing. It was just a few kowtows, and there was already blood flowing out from his forehead. "Sixth young master. Thank you. Thank you. I won't say anything else. I will remember your kindness. In the future, if you tell me to go east, I will definitely not go west. The Hong clan will also follow the sixth young master's lead for the rest of my life." It was no wonder that Hong Jin was so emotional. He had worked very hard since he was young, and that was why he had the chance to become Wan Gengwang's deputy general and lead an army alone. Although he failed in the end when he faced the mercenary army. Didn't he do all this for the sake of bringing glory to the Hong clan? Now, the usually strong Jiaoji army was so weak in the face of the mercenary army. If things went wrong, Jiaoji would be in big trouble. It was hard to say if the Hong clan would be able to survive. And it was at this time that Yang Chendong allowed him to form his own army. Such a huge contrast was equivalent to a person who was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat suddenly finding a 10 million check in his bowl while begging for food. How could he not be excited and filled with gratitude? Hong Jin knelt there with tears of gratitude on his face. Then, he kept swearing. Yang Chendong saw all this, but he wasn't moved. He didn't really want to pity anyone. Because when he thought about how the Han clan would have to be slaves for a few hundred years if it wasn't for his appearance, he was furious. Back then, did anyone pity the Han clan? Of course, the answer was no. In this world, it was sad to rely on other people's pity to survive. The most important thing was to have your own strength. As long as he had enough strength, he would be able to gain the recognition and respect of others. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. As for what Hong Jin said, it might be true now. But when he really obtained a high position, when the mercenary army's strength couldn't affect him, who knew what he would do? Instead of placing his hopes on others, it was better to set strict rules from the start. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about other people causing trouble. Alright, stop kowtowing. Your body is your own. This young master still needs you. If you get injured because of this and can't lead the army, then I'll have to consider changing you. As Yang Chendong said this, Hong Jin knelt there obediently. Obviously, he was really afraid that Yang Chendong would change him. If that was the case, all his hard work and performance would go down the drain. Seeing that Hong Jin's breathing had stabilized, he wasn't as agitated as before. Yang Chendong's voice sounded again, "This young master can allow you to lead an army, but you have to agree to 3 conditions in advance. If you can do it, then this job is yours. If you can't do it, then there's no need to force yourself. This young master won't punish you for this. But if you can't do it, then you won't even have a chance to be free. Do you understand? Understood, this little one understands. Sixth young master, just tell me what to do. At this moment, Hong Jin didn't have the ability to bargain. He had already thought it through. No matter how harsh Yang Chendong's conditions were, he would agree to all of them. No matter how high the requirements were, it was better than not knowing what would happen tomorrow. Seeing that Hong Jin agreed so quickly, Yang Chendong didn't doubt his sincerity. After all, if he was in Hong Jin's shoes, he wouldn't be able to reject the opportunity to lead an army either. Then listen carefully. First, 30,000 soldiers is a limit. No matter what happens in the future, unless there's an order for you, the number of soldiers can't exceed this number. If you're found out, you'll be stripped of your position and investigated. Second, these 30,000 soldiers must listen to the arrangements of the mercenary army unconditionally. If you or any of your subordinates dare to have any selfish thoughts, you'll be killed without mercy. Even you won't be able to escape the crime of not managing your army properly. Third, those who are capable in the Hong family can join the army. Those who aren't can't be forced to join. As for the other Hong family members who aren't young, or the elderly, children, and women, this young master will arrange for them to live in another place. I guarantee that they'll have a good life and won't be in any danger. However, they can't live in Jianghu anymore. It's up to you to decide how to do this job. These are the 3 conditions. If you agree to them, this young master will also promise you what I just said. If you don't, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Yang Chendong stated the 3 conditions and waited for Hong Jin's reply. He didn't have any intention of forcing Hong Jin. There were some things that couldn't be done well without the initiative. As for why he wanted to form a Jianghu mercenary army, it was because the number of mercenaries he had was still too little. If he had to leave behind a sizable army for every territory he conquered, then no amount of mercenaries would be enough. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, Hong Jin, who was kneeling on the ground, heard everything clearly and quickly came to a decision. Sixth young master, Hong Jin is willing. Hong Jin naturally understood the meaning behind Yang Chendong's words. He wouldn't be allowed to grow, let alone form his own faction. At the end of the day, he would only be a puppet. Even so, he was still a general of 30,000 soldiers. As long as he didn't go overboard, there shouldn't be any problems. Compared to those Jianghu generals who wanted to go against the mercenary army, those people were destined to die. Hong Jin was already very fortunate to have what he had. Why would he be unwilling? Chapter 499. What's more, Yang Chendong had also said that as long as the Hong family members were capable, they could also be brought into the army. As long as the descendants of the Hong family worked hard and were nurtured well, this 30,000-strong army would be equivalent to the Hong family's own army. Other than a powerful mercenary group, no one else would be able to suppress him. This could also be considered as bringing glory to the Hong family. Hong Jin agreed. This was within Yang Chendong's expectations. Alright, since that's the case, Tiger's Mane will tell you what to do. From now on, you can put down whatever you're doing. Tomorrow was the 10th day. Yang Chendong had already made his preparations and was about to launch a fierce offensive. Naturally, he would have to put aside the matter of accepting the Hans for now. However, Hong Jin did not know about this. He thought that someone else would take over his job. Now that he was focused on becoming a general, he kowtowed and expressed his gratitude before leaving with Tiger's Mane. After exiting the room, Tiger's Mane walked out while speaking to Hong Jin, who had his head lowered and was one step behind him. You're quite lucky. The young master chose you because of your recent good performance. However, I hope that you can continue to work hard and don't think of other things. Yes, Tiger's Mane is right. Hong Jin will remember. Since the young master has allowed you to become a general, you can go and pick soldiers now. There are 20,000 Jiaoji citizens in Beidai City. Among them, there are around 6,000 youths. You can choose 2,000 of them to follow the mercenary army to the battlefield tomorrow. Of course, you won't be doing anything dangerous. You'll just have to clean up the battlefield, watch over the prisoners, and collect military supplies. Tiger's Mane spoke softly, but these words were like a bolt from the blue in Hong Jin's ears. His mind went blank. Tomorrow? Yes. Tiger's Mane nodded. Since he had decided to use Hong Jin, there were some things that he was not afraid of in advance. The young master and Jiaoji have been feigning civility for 9 days. All the preparations have been completed. Naturally, it's time to turn hostile. Hong Jin could no longer hear Tiger's Mane's next words. His mind was still muddled. He had always thought that the mercenaries couldn't take down the entire Jiaoji, and he didn't want to continue fighting. That was why he decided to negotiate with them. As for his position as a general, it should only be to protect Chu-Yi and Beidai cities. But now, he realized that he couldn't see through Yang Chendong at all. Naturally, he couldn't know what Yang Chendong was really thinking. Could it be that Jiaoji is really going to be destroyed? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hong Jin became excited. If he only wanted to govern Chu-Yi and the northern belt before, wouldn't he be able to govern the entire Jiaoji region? If that was the case, he would have a lot of power. The excitement only lasted for a moment before Hong Jin thought of another terrifying result. His Hong family was still in Jiuzhen Prefecture. Because both sides were negotiating, the Jiaoji army naturally wouldn't do anything to the Hong family. But once the war started, how could he guarantee his family's safety? Tiger's Mane, my Hong family, Hu Meng already knew what Hong Jin wanted to say, so he directly interrupted him and said, "Your Hong family doesn't need to worry." At this moment, the Jiuzhen county should have already been captured by the mercenary navy. Your Hong family will be safe. Jiuzhen Prefecture. It faced the sea from east to west, connected to Jiaoji Prefecture in the north, and connected to Rinan Prefecture in the south. It was an important transportation link in Jiaoji. Previously, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stayed here to stabilize the situation in Jiaoji. But because Hanoi City was in danger, the old King Lily didn't care. The Crown Prince had no choice but to leave for the capital to find a solution. After the Crown Prince left, the normally tense Jiaoji officials were relieved that there was no longer a curse on their heads. Although the mercenaries had appeared in Chu-Yi City and Beidai City, they were still some distance away from them. Not to mention, they had already received orders to send all the Han people out to negotiate with the mercenaries. Since it was a peace negotiation, there was no need to worry about the safety here. Coincidentally, it was drizzling today, so the generals and soldiers guarding the coastline went into their rooms to slack off. May Island. It was near Wuxia City, the source of the eastern coastline of Jiaoji. Usually, there were hundreds of Jiaoji soldiers stationed here. Once they discovered any enemy, they would immediately light the beacon on the island to provide information to the city less than 100 miles away. It was drizzling today. It had been raining since morning, and there was even a moderate drizzle in the afternoon. Under such terrible weather, the visibility on the sea was not high. The Jiaoji soldiers in charge of the lookout could only see about 20 meters ahead of them. Beyond that, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. With their vision obstructed and the fact that there had been no enemy here for many years, the soldiers let down their guard. Under the drizzle, other than the 2 lookout posts on the north and south, the rest of the soldiers had gone to rest in the barracks. In this environment where not even a single bird could be seen, a small boat slowly approached Miao Island. When it was about 100 meters away from the island, it suddenly stopped. Rain and fog were everywhere, forming a very good protection, making it difficult for people to spot it. As soon as the boat came to a stop, 8 men in black tights appeared on the boat and disappeared in a flash. After a few soft splashes, the 8 men dived into the water and headed straight for Miao Island, which was 100 meters away. Just like the Wolf Fang special forces on land, they were like a sharp knife that could be stabbed into the enemy's chest at any time. In the Navy, Division Commander Gao Xiong had invested a lot of energy and resources to form an elite team that struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. They were the Marine Corps. Since its establishment, the Marine Corps had completed no less than 20 missions. Many ships traveling in this sea area wanted to quietly pass by without paying the protection fee, but in the end, the ships sank to the bottom of the sea, which was partly due to their efforts. This time, in order to complete the mission taught by the 6th young master, Commander Nia Tong had transferred a platoon of Marine Corps from Division Commander Gao Xiong. The 8 men just now were just the first batch of soldiers to enter the sea. With the first batch, there would naturally be a second batch. In the blink of an eye, another 8 men had disappeared into the sea. After a few more batches, a platoon of 30 soldiers had entered the sea. About half an hour after these people entered the sea, many large warships appeared behind the small boat. It was as if they had descended from the sky. They first appeared in the white fog, then slowly approached Miao Island. The soldiers on May Island were completely unaware of this. They did not know that their fate had already been decided at this moment. They also did not know that at the edge of the island, 30 mercenaries armed with Type 95 mercenaries had already landed on the shore and were slowly approaching them. They had already practiced infiltration and landing on the island countless times. It was just a group of 100 unprepared enemies. These elite soldiers did not even consider them a threat. If not for the fact that they were afraid of alerting the enemy and causing them to ignite the fire beacon, which would hinder their next attack on the beach, they would not have needed to infiltrate like this and would have directly attacked. Even though they were very confident in their own combat strength, when they reached the island from the sea, the 30 elite soldiers did not immediately make their move. Instead, they carefully observed the terrain. Discovering that it was the same as what they had predicted, other than the 2 Jiaoji soldiers on the lookout posts, there were no other enemies. As the platoon leader of the Marine Corps, Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and made a gesture. Following that, the 10 soldiers advanced forward like foxes. This squad of soldiers was not only responsible for dealing with the enemies on the lookout posts, they were also responsible for protecting the beacon towers that could be ignited at any time. As for Feng Liao Ran, he led the remaining 2 squads of soldiers towards the only military camp on the island, which was a row of stone bungalows. Without any warning, the silencer on the 95 gun fired a bullet. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were still dozing off saw the King of Hell. Following the elimination of the outer sentries, Feng Liao Ran and the rest began to increase their speed. However, their worries were unfounded. Even when they rushed to the entrance of the bungalow, they were still not discovered, and not a single person walked out of the bungalow. Prepare the smoke grenades. Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and ordered while holding his gun. Ever since the smoke grenades were taken out by Yang Qindong from the warehouse, they had been the research object of the Crimson City's arsenal. Finally, they had successfully replicated it a while ago. However, because too many things were involved, they were still unable to mass-produce them. However, an elite force like the Marine Corps was naturally equipped with them. Break the door and throw the grenades. With a very straightforward battle order, a Marine raised his right leg and fiercely kicked towards the camp gate. Clang! The moment the door was opened, 2 smoke grenades were successfully thrown in. Then, the door was closed. 2 platoons of Marines stared at the door, 21 muzzles were aimed at it to prevent any accidents from happening. Cough cough cough, in less than 2 breaths of time, loud coughing sounds echoed throughout the camp. Then, the camp door was pushed open, and the Jiaoji soldiers who were choking with tears in their eyes ran out. The first Jiaoji soldier who ran out did not even have time to see what was going on outside when he felt his body become light and was sent flying. Before he could regain his composure and see what was going on around him, a cold muzzle was pointed at his head. Chapter 500. The second soldier suffered the same fate, followed by the third, the fourth. It was just like a normal drill. There were only 20 Marines, and they captured all of the Jianghu soldiers who were running around alone. From the moment they broke through the door to the end, it took less than 15 minutes, and the overall situation was decided. Maple Piaron led 2 of his team members into the barracks, but there was only a mess here. When there was not a single person in sight, the battle was declared to have ended. The swift action plan and lightning-fast surprise attack gave people the feeling that they were using a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Even though Maple Piaron and the other soldiers had complete control of May Island, they did not show any excitement on their faces. Perhaps to them, the mission was too easy to complete, and there was no longer any sense of challenge, let alone excitement. The warship behind them sailed past May Island. When Commander Nia Yong saw Maple Piaron and the other soldiers saluting him, he immediately returned a standard military salute, and then said to the deputy commander beside him, "Leave one warship for platoon leader Maple, the rest of the ships move forward at full speed, the destination is Noeve City." After the order was given, the steam-powered ships that had been modified by the shipyard in Chichen City suddenly emitted black smoke, and like an arrow released from a bow, they flew across the sea and headed straight for Noeve City, which was dozens of miles away. Noeve City. It was still drizzling, but the soldiers and civilians of Jianghu who had long been accustomed to such terrible weather did not have much of an impact. The city gates were wide open, and people were constantly entering and exiting. All kinds of hawking sounds could be heard, and it was very lively. On the tower of Noeve City, a Jianghu soldier was leaning against a stone pillar and taking a nap. Perhaps it was the raindrops that fell on his face, causing him to slowly open his eyes at this moment. As he reached out to wipe the raindrops off his face, his gaze swept across the distance, and then he closed his eyes to continue his nap. But just as his head was about to lower, he suddenly thought of something and opened his eyes abruptly. He then pointed at the coastline in the distance with a somewhat shocked expression, and his voice also became a little stuttered due to the fear. "Enemy, enemy, enemy, enemy attack." Following this shout, the large ship in the distance had finished docking, and more black figures were running in this direction. More and more Jianghu soldiers saw this scene from the top of the city walls and fell into chaos. Caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the enemy along the coastline and without receiving any signal from the island, the Jianghu soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't even have the time to close the city gates. All they could do was watch helplessly as the mercenaries in white sailor uniforms approached and entered the city. Noeve City is finished. Southern Ming Dynasty's capital, Nanjing House. The travel-worn Jianghu diplomatic group entered the city. When the news reached the ears of Zhu Qizhen, who was having a meal with Empress Qian in the palace, a smile finally appeared on his face. Long before the Jianghu diplomatic mission entered the southern border, the embroidered uniform guard in charge of gathering information had already found out about their objective. The Duke of Zhongdang had unexpectedly led his troops through the Langsun region. Following that, he took down Tsui and Beidai, catching the Jianghu army by surprise. When the news spread, even Zhu Qizhen was shocked. He knew how powerful Yang Chendong was, and he had a clear understanding and evaluation of the military strength of the mercenaries. However, he still didn't expect them to be so powerful and so fast. They actually managed to kill their way into the inner region of Jianghu. It took him a long time to calm down from the shock. Zhu Qizhen was overjoyed as he knew his chance had come. Although Yang Chendong's strength was not what he wanted to see, his current actions had indeed solved a lot of problems for him. Once the southwest Jianghu surrendered, Shiping King Mu Bin would be free and would no longer need to defend the southwest. When that time comes, he would be able to send out his troops to attack the Min King. If that was the case, then he had seen hope in reclaiming the lost land in the southwest. The excited Zhu Qizhen suppressed the urge to order Mu Bin to send out his troops. He decided to see what the Jianghu envoy group had to say first. Since they were here to admit defeat, he was not going to let them off the hook this time. He was going to squeeze them dry. He wouldn't forget that if the Jiaoji army hadn't helped the Min king, how could the other party have become so powerful? He also wouldn't forget that old man Lili still wanted to marry his third princess. What's wrong, Your Majesty? You seem to be very happy. Empress Qian noticed that Zhu Qizhen became much more excited after Chao Jixiang came over and told him about the Jiaoji diplomatic mission. As the empress, she was naturally happy for the emperor. "Ha, Empress, we can finally hold our heads high this time. Just watch. It won't be long before the matter of the southwest is resolved. Once that matter is resolved, we will work hard to govern. There will come a day when we return to the capital of the north. There can only be one great Ming, and there must be one." Seeing the emperor in such high spirits, Empress Qian was naturally overjoyed. She even ate an extra bowl of rice due to her poor appetite. The Jiaoji diplomatic mission entered the capital. As soon as they entered the relay station, they sent a letter to the Bureau of Rights, requesting an audience with Lu De, the Minister of Rights, and the Emperor of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Zhu Qizhen had already issued a decree, so how could Lu De allow the other party to meet the emperor so easily? Even he didn't plan on meeting the other party immediately. Instead, he sent a right assistant minister to probe the other party's bottom line. In Nanjing, the Jiaoji diplomatic mission and the Southern Ming Bureau of Rights were still probing each other. Within Jiaoji, scouts were galloping on horseback. They were all soldiers sent by the various cities of Jiuzhen County to ask for reinforcements. In the face of Niatong's Lingfengai army and 2 naval auxiliary divisions, they had captured one city after another. In just the first day, Wuxi and Xiupu cities had fallen. If there were no accidents, tomorrow at this time, the city walls would not be high, and the defenders would only have 2,000 soldiers, so Jufeng city would also be breached. Such speed made the generals of the various cities of Jiuzhen County tremble in fear. They could only send people out to Haniai city to ask for reinforcements. However, even the generals who sent people out knew that distant water couldn't quench their immediate thirst. Before reinforcements arrived, they would lose their cities and their positions. This time, even if they lost, they couldn't understand why. Didn't they say they were going to negotiate? Moreover, the negotiations were going smoothly. Why did the mercenaries suddenly attack? What was going on? Jiaoji Prime Minister Yuan also didn't understand what was going on. While they were eating dinner in their temporary residence, the head of the guard suddenly came to report that there were many more mercenaries outside the residence. They had actually surrounded the residence. They surrounded us? What do they want? Yuan hurriedly put down his chopsticks and looked at the guard captain in confusion. This subordinate doesn't know. The guard captain shook his head and added, however, those people don't seem to have any intention of charging in. They're just guarding the door and preventing our people from entering. They're only surrounding us? Could it be that there's a change in the military situation? The Prime Minister was indeed the Prime Minister. Yuan immediately thought of a possibility. Then he exclaimed, quickly, "Go negotiate with the mercenaries outside. I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. If that doesn't work, I can also see General Hong Jin." The sudden change made Yuan Chuancheng's expression change greatly, although he still didn't know what had happened outside. Although he didn't know what was going on outside, just the fact that the residence was surrounded was enough for him to think of the worst. "Sir, this subordinate has tried, but the other party didn't pay attention to me." The guard captain first raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong with a very difficult expression. Then he lowered his head again. Plop. Yuan Chuncheng sat back down on the wooden chair. His eyes were glazed over. He knew that this time the matter was serious. The moment Prime Minister Yuan's temporary residence was surrounded was the moment the mercenaries set out. 50,000 young Han people from Jiaoji had already entered Beidai city. Along with them were 5,000 Type 81 rifles made in Qiqian city's arsenal, as well as 20 individual rocket launchers and some corresponding firearms and ammunition. This was all that the munitions factory had in stock at the moment. Although Gao Xiong had dominated the seas with the navy and obtained a lot of copper and iron, the actual production was still very low. It was different from the production lines of factories in the future. Many things still needed to be completed by manpower. This made it so that during normal times, the things produced could still be used by the army. However, once there was a war, the production and consumption could not be proportional. For this matter, Yang Chendong had ordered the arsenal to continue expanding. His footsteps of conquering the world did not want to stop because of firearms and ammunition. However, some things could not be eaten in one bite. It needed to be digested and absorbed slowly. The manufacturing of weapons was based on this principle. The 5,000 Type 81 rifles sent from the rear were only for Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers to use. After all, if a gun fired too many bullets, there would be problems with the rifling. Problems such as the accuracy of the gun and the jamming of bullets would follow one after another. It was necessary to have a replacement port. The lack of firearms was also the reason why Yang Chendong allowed Hong Jin to form his own mercenary army. Firstly, there would be someone to manage Jiaoji in the future. Secondly, to prevent firearms from being wasted for no reason, there would be a need for some cold weapons battles. This was the time when Hong Jin and the rest could be used. Chapter 501. However, in order to prevent a situation like this from happening in the future, they were only allowed to have 30,000 soldiers. This was a form of self-protection. With weapons and sufficient manpower, Yang Chendong did not want to wait any longer. He wanted to take down Jiaoji first. This was the first step towards achieving his life goal. If he could not even conquer a small country like Jiaoji, how could he conquer the entire world? Only one auxiliary battalion and one temporary auxiliary battalion were left in Beidai City. Not counting the companies directly under the regiment, there were a total of 20 fully staffed battalions. They set off from Beidai City towards Hanoi City. The person in charge of the vanguard was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Kong Chuanxin. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Sheng, was still fighting the black soldiers of the Jiaoji Chen Heijin tribe in the Lang Sun region. The commander of the 2nd Battalion, Chen Bo, had led his men to take down Beidai City previously. This time, it was finally Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion's turn to make a name for themselves. 9 days ago, Battalion Commander Kong received the news. He gathered 4 of his elite company commanders and trained them according to the situation in Hanoi. Now that the army was finally ready to depart, the 3rd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front set off 2 hours ahead of the main force. The moment they left Beidai City, Commander Kong Chuanxin gave the order for the troops to set off at full speed. He only gave everyone 20 hours to cover the distance of nearly 200 miles. This was a forced march. The troops had to reach Hanoi City before daybreak and rest for at least 4 hours before starting the siege. Once the order was given, it had to be carried out. The requirement to cover 200 li in 20 hours did not tire the soldiers out. On the contrary, they were all excited. Even the 4 auxiliary battalions at the back of the troops had high morale. After witnessing the power of the continuous fire guns, there was not a single soldier who did not want to own a gun of their own. Thus, becoming an auxiliary battalion became the hope of many. They did not have the chance in the past. Now that the opportunity was right in front of them, everyone was fighting to be the first. It was precisely because of their strong morale that the 7 battalions of mercenaries marched at a speed that somewhat exceeded the expectations of Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. They actually ran all the way to Hanoi City. Based on this speed, it was likely that they would arrive 2 hours earlier than the original plan. This would give everyone more time to rest under the city, and they would have more confidence in taking down Hanoi City in one battle. Hanoi City. Under King Li Li's complete control, everything here was managed by the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. When they arrived at Hanoi from Jianghu Prefecture, Li Yuanlong was a little worried. From time to time, there would be mercenaries patrolling the waters around the Jianghu Prefecture, so he knew better than anyone else what kind of opponent he was facing. With the current strength of the Jianghu kingdom, they had no chance of winning against the cannons and guns. Unless they could produce more ironware, they might be able to rely on their defense and terrain advantage to resist for a period of time. It seemed that Li Yuanlong was worried about whether he had enough time. Fortunately, he had sent out his trump card, Prime Minister Yuan, and he did not let him down. As soon as he entered Beidai City, he stabilized the momentum of the mercenaries. With sufficient time and the diplomatic mission sent to the capital of the Southern Ming Dynasty, Nanjing, once the Southern Ming Emperor issued an imperial edict, the loyal Duke of the Great Ming Dynasty would have no choice but to give up. The hope of the Jianghu kingdom would reappear. It seemed that the situation was developing in his favor. Li Yuanlong's complexion had also improved a lot over the past few days. In addition, he did not place his hopes on anyone else. The blacksmiths in the army were working day and night to produce iron shields. Even some of the private blacksmiths in the city were temporarily recruited to help with the production of iron carriages. They had already produced 10 iron carriages that could accommodate 200 people, as well as 2,000 iron shields. With this, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. After all, Jianghu had been established for more than 20 years, so it still had some war reserves. Otherwise, how would it dare to agree to the Min king's request to stir up trouble in the southern Ming Empire? Just like now, after a few days of adjustment, there were now about 80,000 soldiers in Hanoi City. With the existence of these 80,000 soldiers, Hanoi City gave outsiders the impression that it was impregnable. Nearly 300,000 citizens of Hanoi City walked out of the fog of war, and the businesses on the streets returned to normal. From afar, it was a bustling scene. However, all of this changed as the scout in front of them galloped into the city. Report. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had just finished inspecting the military supplies and returned to his residence. He did not even have the time to sit down and drink a cup of tea before he saw the scout who was drenched in the rain. For some reason, Li Yuanlong's heart skipped a beat when he saw the scout in such a sorry state. He had a bad feeling about this. However, he did not show it. Instead, he tried his best to stabilize his body and mind. Why are you panicking? Reporting to Your Highness the Crown Prince. This morning, the gates of Beidai City suddenly opened wide. Then, thousands of mercenaries came out of the gates and headed straight for Hanoi City. After the anxious scout finished reporting, he couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. From the moment he received the news until he returned to the city, he did not stop for a moment. As a result, his body was severely dehydrated. However, he did not have the time to drink water. He only wanted to deliver the news as soon as possible so that the crown prince could be prepared. Even though he was mentally prepared, when he heard the scout's report, Li Yuanlong could not help but feel a wave of dizziness. The scout's figure also swayed in front of him. After a few breaths, Li Yuanlong slowly adjusted his breathing. Then, he tried his best to use a calm voice to ask, "You said that there were thousands of people coming out of the city. How many are there?" "Around 3,000. The scout thought for a moment before replying cautiously. Anyone who could become a scout was not only agile, but more importantly, had extraordinary eyesight. Otherwise, erroneous military intelligence could lead to extremely serious consequences. Even though he only saw the mercenaries coming out of the city, he was still able to estimate the enemy's actual military strength. When he heard that there were only 3,000 people, Li Yuanlong's originally panicked emotions became much more stable. If it was just these people, it might not mean that the mercenaries were really going to war with the Jianghu kingdom. Perhaps there were other reasons. After all, no matter how powerful the enemy was, it was too much to expect 3,000 people to take down the capital of Jianghu, which had 80,000 soldiers and 300,000 citizens. All right, this crown prince understands. Men, send him away to rest. Li Yuanlong's mind instantly flashed with countless possibilities. When he saw that the scout had left, he said to another guard beside him, "Immediately go and find General Fan and General Yuan." In less than an hour, the famous general of the Jiaoxi kingdom, Fan Yuhai, General Yuan Genwang, Huang Hua, Li Xiaozhong, and the others hurriedly arrived at the Crown Prince's residence. Even though they didn't know what had happened, the Crown Prince's sudden summons meant that something big must have happened. When the generals arrived at the main hall of the Crown Prince's residence, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong walked into the hall under the protection of a few guards. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." The generals bowed. "Generals, there's no need to be so courteous." Li Yuanlong sat down on a large chair and swept his gaze across the generals. Then, he said in a low voice, "I just received a report from a scout that 3,000 mercenaries suddenly came out of Beidai City. They are heading straight for our Hanoi city. Perhaps they will appear at the city's gates tomorrow." "What?" When the generals heard this, their expressions changed. It was obvious that they were shocked by this sudden news. However, this change in expression didn't show fear. Instead, it revealed a hint of excitement. As for the mercenaries, Huang Genwang and Huang Hua were the only two generals who had fought with them. Moreover, Huang Genwang had fought with the mercenaries in the rainforest of Mount Liang. From the beginning to the end, he hadn't seen the mercenaries. Even though his losses weren't small, he didn't have any direct knowledge of them. On the contrary, ever since he returned to Hanoi City, he had been thinking about blood. However, because the Crown Prince's policy was to delay the negotiations, there was no room for him to display his skills. Now that he finally had a chance to fight, how could he not be excited? Huang Genwang wasn't the only one who thought this way. Other than Huang Hua, all the other generals had the same thought. The Crown Prince's words were very clear. This time, there were only 3,000 mercenaries. 3,000 people. How big of a storm could they cause? If the other party had only sent 30,000 people, it might be scary. However, with the difference in numbers, how could they show the slightest bit of fear? Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was also paying attention to the reactions of the generals. He was very satisfied with the answer. Other than Huang Hua and Fan Yuhai who were frowning, the other generals had an eager expression. They couldn't wait to lead their troops into battle. Huang Hua's performance was within Li Yuanlong's expectations. This person had once led 5,000 mercenaries to attack Beidai City. The result was a crushing defeat. With such a shadow in his heart, it was normal for him to have no confidence when facing the mercenaries. However, Fan Yuhai was also frowning. What did this mean? At this moment, Li Yuanlong couldn't figure it out. Chapter 502. General Fan, what do you think of the current situation? Li Yuanlong called out his name. In fact, Fan Yuhai, who could be called a famous general, had some weight in the eyes of both Li Yuanlong and Li Yuanlong. Fan Yuhai, who was called out, first bowed and then raised his eyebrows. "Your Highness. Previously, we were negotiating with the mercenaries, and we even sent a lot of Han people over. Logically speaking, we should be cooperating happily, but why would they suddenly send troops over? What is the reason? Or did something happen that we don't know about? In my opinion, before things are clear, it's better not to use weapons." Fan Yuhai's words could be said to be an experienced strategist. The art of war said to subdue the enemy's soldiers without fighting, the best of the best. Above all, the best strategy was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. In other words, it was best not to use weapons if possible. Especially in this kind of battle where one had no confidence, one had to be extremely careful. The other generals were clearly dissatisfied with Fan Yuhai's words. The so-called generals were naturally the ones who led the troops. However, if the world was peaceful, their existence would not be so meaningful and they would inevitably be looked down upon. Therefore, a true general needed to use war to prove himself. Fan Yuhai only said that the situation was strange and needed to be investigated. If this was not to stop the soldiers, what else could it be? It would be strange if he could gain the support of the other generals. If it wasn't for the Crown Prince personally stating his stance, there would have been people criticizing Fan Yuhai and even impeaching him for being afraid of battle. This couldn't be said to be groundless. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong listened to Fan Yuhai's words seriously and then nodded in tacit agreement. That's right, General Fan's words are exactly what this Crown Prince is worried about. Before we can figure out what's going on, it's best if we don't use our weapons. Hearing that even the Crown Prince agreed with Fan Yuhai's words, Yuan Gengwang and the other generals were inevitably disappointed. They originally thought that they would not have the chance to lead troops this time. Unexpectedly, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong continued, "But if the mercenaries arrive tomorrow, what should we do? Are we going to let them show off and challenge us? Of course not. We don't want to go to war, but we aren't afraid of war. If the mercenaries really dare to do this, the soldiers of Jianghu won't be afraid. We'll just go out of the city and destroy their prestige." Fan Yuhai raised his head and said with determination. Anyone who could be called a famous general would not be a coward. It wasn't that Fan Yuhai didn't want to fight, but he didn't want to fight a cowardly battle without any basis. The so-called war was nothing more than a final choice in the face of the futility of peace talks and other situations. If there were other ways, no one would choose such a path that would waste manpower and resources. However, if the mercenaries were really looking down on the Jianghu army, there was no harm in teaching them a lesson. However, there were only 3,000 of them. In Hanoi City, which had an army of 80,000, they were nothing in the eyes of the generals. After all, Jianghu had been established for more than 20 years. Their military strength was definitely not limited to this. Previously, he had considered the fact that Hanoi City could not afford to station too many soldiers, so he had only sent 80,000. If he really wanted to mobilize, it would not be a problem to gather another 100,000 soldiers in the entire Jianghu prefecture. Good. Hearing Fan Yuhai's words, Li Yuanlong replied happily. This was what he wanted. No matter what the mercenaries wanted to do in Hanoi City, they could not be allowed to do as they pleased. Otherwise, it would be a provocation to him, the Crown Prince. This was something that he would not allow and was unwilling to see. Li Yuanlong, who already had a plan in mind, immediately started to arrange the troops after hearing Fan Yuhai's words. Some negotiations had to be fought. The principle of peace through fighting was applicable at all times. Compared to Kong Chuanxin, who led the 3 battalions out of the city, Ong Qindong's troops were not as hurried out of the city. The 5,000 Lingfeng, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers naturally walked at the front of the group. Behind them were the 47,000 youths from Qiming City. After leaving behind 2,000 men in Chuyi City, 1,000 men from Beidai City were left behind to take charge of the various tasks in the city. At the end of the group was the general of Jianghu, Hong Jin, and the 2,000 newly recruited Jianghu mercenaries. After receiving Yang Qindong's instructions, Hong Jin used only a day to form a temporary army of 2,000 men. One had to admit that he was very efficient. If it wasn't for the fact that there were not many people of suitable age in Beidai City, he would probably have formed an even larger army. The 60,000 men group walked and stopped along the way. They were not in a hurry as they made their way from Beidai City to Hanoi City. Yang Qindong was in the middle of the group, riding on a strong white horse. In his hand was a handful of bullets that had just been transported. He had a look of deep thought on his face. These bullets were randomly selected by Tiger's Mane from the thousands of boxes of bullets that had been transported over. The moment the bullets were placed in Yang Qindong's hands, his expression became much more serious. Bullets were something that Yang Qindong had dealt with for many years in his previous life. From the moment the new recruits joined the company to the time he retired to the military supply department due to his age, the number of bullets that passed through his hands numbered in the tens of thousands. He did not even need to open his eyes to look at the shape of the bullets. He only needed to touch them to know what kind of gun it was, and what caliber it was. It was because he understood it so well that when he received the new bullets from Qiming City's factory, his heart was heavy. Even though Yang Chendong had taken out various books and finished bullets, they were still 500 years ahead of time. The various technologies were completely unable to keep up, causing the current process of manufacturing bullets to rely entirely on manual labor. This also caused the shape of the bullets to be completely different, and many of them were even unqualified. Just like the handful in Yang Chendong's hands, there were only a dozen bullets, and they were divided into several sizes. Among them, there were Type 81-7, 62mm bullets, and Type 95-5, 88mm bullets. Although these two sizes of bullets looked similar to the bullets used before, in reality, there were some differences in the shape and weight of the bullets. It was these differences that caused Yang Chendong a headache. Firearms were not a joke. Even for a sharpshooter, giving him a new gun would require time to get used to it. This was because even if the guns were mechanized, there would still be differences. Not to mention the bullets for these guns that were all made by hand. 5,000 newly shipped Type 81 rifles, 500 newly shipped Type 95 rifles, Yang Chendong had seen them all, and the differences were not small. Now that the differences in the bullets were so great, it would greatly reduce the accuracy of the bullets. This was where Yang Chendong was worried. First, the second batch of guns and bullets were slightly better. After all, they were all made by experienced blacksmiths. Although there were some differences, the problem was not too big. The accuracy on the battlefield could still reach about 70%. However, because of the increase in demand at the front, the munitions factory at the rear was constantly expanding. The new recruits were mostly inexperienced, so the specifications of the products were naturally much worse. Yesterday, at the temporary shooting range in Beatty City, Yang Chendong had tried it himself. With his strength, the bullets he shot only hit the target 60% of the time. After constant shooting correction, the hit rate finally reached more than 80%. It was easy to imagine that after equipping the normal auxiliary soldiers, they would have a 30% accuracy rate. That would already be very good. This was the case when technology was not developed. Yang Chendong also knew that some things could not be forced. He could only hope that the soldiers could quickly adapt to the new guns and bullets, and not let these things adapt to them. Chapter 503. While the soldiers were resting, Kong Chuanxin, as the battalion commander, did not go to rest. Instead, he called for his 4 company commanders and 6 auxiliary battalion commanders to gather around a bonfire for a meeting. Ever since they left Beidai City, Kong Chuanxin's excitement hadn't stopped. This was the first battle against the capital of the Jiaoxi nation, Hanoi City. Now that it was handed over to him, it was enough to prove how much the 6th young master valued him. This was also the first time the mercenaries fought against an enemy's capital. It was bound to be recorded in the annals of history. As the commander of this battle, he was bound to be remembered in the history of the mercenaries. However, whether this record was good or bad would depend on tomorrow's performance. He called all the officers over for a discussion. Even though there were 7 battalion commanders, including himself, but in reality, there were still some differences in strength. For example, Kong Chuanxin's position as the commander of the Cold Vanguard Battalion had the highest authority. He was equivalent to a battalion commander of the A Battalion, an auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a B Battalion, and a temporary auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a C Battalion. Therefore, right from the start of the meeting, Kong Chuanxin held the initiative. He didn't even bother to ask the other 6 battalion commanders what they thought. Instead, he focused his attention on Tian Su, the company commander of the 3rd Battalion's 1st Company. If the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion was the main offensive company, then the commander of the 1st Company under him was the best company of the 3rd Battalion. At the very least, the destructive power and military strength of this company was far greater than that of an auxiliary battalion. Compared to the temporary auxiliary battalion, it was at least 3 to 4 times more powerful. 1st Company Commander, what do you think of being the main offensive force for tomorrow's battle? Kong Chuanxin asked directly without any pleasantries. Thank you for your trust, 1st Company will definitely complete the mission. Tian Su stood up excitedly. His face was flushed with excitement. Naturally, the other 3 company commanders of the 3rd Battalion were dissatisfied. But there was nothing they could do about it. After all, he was the company commander of the 1st Company. In the previous few small-scale competitions held in the barracks, the 1st Company had always been victorious. They were the most outstanding in all aspects, and this was also recognized by everyone. After considering the importance of tomorrow's battle, the 3 company commanders didn't say anything even though they were still a little jealous. It was a good thing to have a certain level of competition. However, if internal strife were to occur because of this, it would ultimately affect the overall combat strength of the entire 3rd Battalion. That would be a big deal. The result was very straightforward. Whoever had internal strife would be fired. Due to this reason, since the establishment of Cold Front, 4 company-level officers had been demoted because of internal strife. They had all been reported to the 6th Young Master for approval. The 4 company commanders, who originally had a bright future ahead of them, wanted to achieve more achievements, so they started to play tricks in the dark. Later, they were discovered by the government and reported to the 6th Young Master. The 4 of them were immediately removed from their positions and sent to the various factories in Crimson City for observation. If they didn't perform well, they would be sent to farm, and there would be no future for them. The 6th Young Master had said more than once that it was hard to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Especially in the Cold Front, there were many heroes and heroines. Even without them, the Cold Front would still continue. If anyone dared to have such thoughts and wanted to challenge his bottom line, then they could try. After the incident with the 4 company commanders, the relationship between the officers had improved a lot. Normal competition still existed, and this was encouraged by the higher-ups. However, there were no longer any cases of people using unscrupulous methods to achieve victory. Perhaps there were still some who had such thoughts, but they definitely wouldn't dare to do it. When Tian Su was called out by Kong Chuanxin, his face was filled with excitement. Kong Chuanxin was also very satisfied with the morale of the other party. He nodded and said, "Good. Tomorrow morning, we will see your company's performance. The other battalions will cooperate with you. However, I will say the ugly words first. If your performance is not good, and you don't reach the standard of your usual training, then this battalion commander will have the authority to replace you at any time. When that time comes, don't come complaining to me. Yes, I promise to complete the mission." After saying this, Tian Su scratched his head embarrassedly. Obviously, this wasn't the first time he had complained to his superiors because he couldn't get the main attack mission. Kong Chuanxin quickly decided on the main attack mission, causing the auxiliary battalion commanders and temporary battalion commanders to be extremely envious. However, they could only be envious in their hearts. After all, Leng Feng's strength was there for all to see. Leng Feng was able to hit the target with 60% to 70% of the bullets that were issued later. However, the temporary battalion commanders only had an average of 30% of the bullets. With such a huge difference, even if they weren't convinced, they had no choice but to accept it. After the main attack mission was assigned, it was time to assign the auxiliary attack missions. Regarding this, the military plan had already been formulated before they set off from Beidao City. Now, it was just a matter of repeating it. It was because of this that the pre-battle meeting was conducted in an orderly manner. Compared to the calm mercenaries outside the city, the Jianghu soldiers in Hanoi City were shocked by the sudden appearance of the enemy. The general on duty reported the discovery of the mercenaries to his superiors. When the news reached the ears of the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, who was in the palace, he was extremely shocked. The first thing he said was, "How can these mercenaries be so fast? Did they fall from the sky?" Li Yuanlong couldn't be blamed for this. The distance between Beidao City and Hanoi City was close to 200 li based on the speed of the Jianghu army. It would normally take 3 days if they were fast, 4 to 5 days if they were slow. However, in less than a day, the mercenaries had already covered the entire distance. Just this speed alone was enough to make one look at them in a new light. The generals in the city were also summoned to the main hall of the palace. After hearing the news, they were all extremely shocked. Just like the time when Huang Hua led his army to attack Beidao City, he had already tried his best. However, it still took 2.5 days for 5,000 soldiers to reach Beidao City. In comparison, wouldn't his marching speed be no different from a snail's? Fortunately, this topic was quickly forgotten. The first thing everyone did when they gathered was to think about what to do next. The original plan was to leave the city the next day and arrange the troops to prepare for battle. However, from the looks of it now, it wasn't appropriate to do so. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong turned his attention to General Ruan Gengwang. After all, the first battle of the plan was to be completed by this person. Previously, Ruan Gengwang's troops had contributed greatly to the battle with King Min in Nanming Kingdom. When they deployed, they only had 50,000 men. Later on, they expanded to 100,000 men. They even brought back 10,000 captives and various treasures. At that time, he was in the limelight. At that time, Ruan Gengwang was also in the limelight and looked down on everyone. With the appearance of the mercenaries, the situation began to change. As a result, only 15% of his 100,000 men returned to Hanoi City. When they deployed 50,000 men, they only returned 15,000 defeated soldiers. This caused many people to question Ruan Gengwang's ability. Coincidentally, Prime Minister Yuan Chunsheng went to Beidao City to negotiate with the Jianghu army. His position became even more precarious. Helplessly, he could only try his best to fight for the role of the vanguard. He hoped that he could redeem himself from the previous defeat and become a pillar among the generals again. Li Yuanlong also gave him a chance to turn over a new leaf. He used his position as crown prince to convince everyone. Not only did he not take back his original authority of 15,000 men, he gave him another 5,000 men, making 20,000 men as the vanguard. 20,000 men against 3,000 mercenaries. The ratio was 7-1. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. No one saw the possibility of defeat. However, the sudden appearance of the mercenaries had caught them off guard. However, after the initial panic, Ruan Gengwang already walked out of the ranks in armor. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, I am willing to lead soldiers out of the city tonight to set up defenses in preparation for tomorrow's battle." Good. Li Yuanlong was waiting for this sentence. "Thank you for your hard work, General Ruan. In a while, you can go get 1,000 iron shields to prepare for tomorrow's battle. The other generals, do your own work according to what we discussed earlier. When the sky brightens, follow me to the city tower to take a look." "Yes." All the generals bowed and replied in unison. Among them, Ruan Gengwang's face was flushed red. He was faintly excited. Not long after the generals came out of the palace returned to the camp, Ruan Gengwang's troops moved. 20,000 soldiers came out of the east side of the city and began to form a formation 2 miles away from the city. They made a huge commotion. This also attracted the attention of the mercenaries. The 2 company commanders in charge of security had their bayonets loaded with guns. If anything unexpected happened, they would fire their guns. Fortunately, Ruan Gengwang's troops only came out of the city and did not intend to attack immediately. Perhaps he also wanted to take action at dawn. This was an opportunity to perform well in front of the crown prince and the civil and military officials. If they attacked the camp now, even if they won, how many people would be able to see their majestic and heroic appearance? Fortunately, Yuan did not send troops out at night. Otherwise, they, who were not good at night battles, would lose even more miserably. Of course, General Yuan did not understand this point yet. Everything would have to wait until dawn. After the results of the battle were out, he would know what it meant to strike a stone with an egg. Following this, even though the distance between the two armies was less than 3 miles, and the enemy's barracks could be seen from afar, it was still peaceful. When dawn broke the next day, smoke rose from the camp. The cooks started to get busy. A great battle was about to take place in Jianghu. Chapter 504. Southern Ming Capital, Nanjing Imperial Palace. The Minister of Rites, Lu De, was asked to stay behind by Zhu Qizhan after the morning assembly. Compared to a while ago, Zhu Qizhan's face was much rosier, and his mental state was much stronger. Even when he spoke to his subjects, his tone was much friendlier. Minister Lu, how are the negotiations with the Jianghu diplomatic mission going? Your Majesty, this subject is preparing to report this matter to you. Just last night, after the efforts of the officials from the Ministry of Rites, the Jianghu diplomatic group finally agreed to submit to the Southern Ming Dynasty. If needed, they can also send troops to attack the Min King's army. Your Majesty only needs to issue a decree for the Duke of Loyalty to disband the mercenaries. When talking about these, Lu De could be said to be talking non-stop, spittle flying everywhere. The so-called unity of the Ministry of Rites was actually nothing much. It was only because the Jianghu diplomatic mission could not drag on any longer that they took the initiative to give in. However, other people didn't know about all this. Lu De could naturally put all the credit on his head and flatter himself. Oh! When Zhu Qizhan heard that Jianghu was not only willing to submit, but also send troops to help him deal with the rebel king of Min's faction, his eyes widened. He then shouted loudly and slapped his hands on the dragon shore. It was no wonder that Zhu Qizhan was so excited. If it was a small Jianghu in the past, he would not take it seriously. However, ever since his defeat at the Battle of Tumu, he had not had a peaceful time. He had walked step by step. To be able to persevere until now, he felt somewhat tired. After enduring for so long, he finally saw hope. How could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? Zhu Qizhan was truly happy. The king of Min was able to gain power with the help of the Jianghu army. Why couldn't he gain their help to defeat the enemy? Once the king of Min's army was defeated, the southern Ming would take back Guangdong, Guangxi, and Yunnan. Not only that, he had also gained the friendship of Jianghu. When the time came, he could ask them to send troops to help him deal with the Baiming king of Yu, Zhu Qiyu. It would not be impossible for him to unify the great Ming. When Zhu Qizhan thought about how he finally saw the hope of unifying the great Ming dynasty, he wanted to cry. In the past 2 years, he rarely had a good night's sleep. Most of the time, he had nightmares. Now that he could finally get rid of all of this, it was a wonderful feeling. Zhu Qizhan's cheerful appearance was seen by Lu De. On the surface, he also had a smile on his face, as if he was happy for the emperor, but in his heart, he was thinking about how to use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chendong. Putting aside the fact that he had been in conflict with Yang Chendong because of the Hangzhou prefectural magistrate, when Yang Chendong had asked for the throne, even when Zhu Qizhan had agreed to it, he had taken the initiative to step forward and come up with a plan. He had used the reason that he needed to inform the Emperor of Baiming to ruin the plan. From this point alone, the conflict between the two sides was irreconcilable. A while ago, he heard that the mercenaries had actually killed their way through the Lang Sun region and reached the hinterland of Jianghu. No one was more worried than him. Lu De was truly afraid that Yang Chendong was too powerful. If that was the case, he would be able to cause trouble for him at any time. Just as he was anxious and hesitant, even Lu De was thinking about whether he should send someone to contact Yang Qindong privately and take the initiative to submit to him in order to ensure his safety in the future. The Jiaoji diplomatic group appeared at the right time. After forgiving them for 2 or 3 days, they completely submitted to him. This gave Lu De hope that the matter could be resolved. Now that he saw how happy Zhu Qizhen was, he rolled his eyes and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, Jiaoji is willing to submit to you and is willing to help your Majesty send troops to quell the rebellion. However, there is a prerequisite for all of this. That is, the Duke of Loyalty has to disband the mercenaries. However, there is a saying since ancient times that when a general is away, military orders cannot be given. Will he agree? After hearing this, Zhu Qizhen's eyes flashed with anger. He was the current emperor. His words were the imperial edict. If anyone disobeyed, it would be considered as disobeying the imperial edict. Who would dare to disobey the imperial edict? Of course, this anger was only a flash. Even Zhu Qizhen himself knew that his so-called authority as the emperor was naturally an extraordinary existence in the eyes of other officials, but it might not really have any effect on Yang Qindong. Didn't he previously order the Duke of Loyalty, who had resolved the rebellion in Guangdong, to disband the mercenaries and return to the capital? However, the other party still didn't agree. Not to mention, Jiaoji, which was thousands of li away, had the qualifications to disobey the imperial edict. If Yang Qindong disobeyed his imperial edict, wouldn't his reputation as the emperor be tarnished if word got out? If that really happened, Jiaoji wouldn't seek him out even if they had to admit defeat. The favorable situation would be lost in an instant. Zhu Qizhen felt a headache coming on. But no matter what, he was still an emperor. Even if Zhu Qizhen didn't have the confidence, he couldn't show weakness in front of an official. So he only said ambiguously, "Beloved official Lu is right. The Duke of Zhongdan is currently fighting a bloody battle in Jiaoji. We also don't know what the situation is like there. If the imperial edict delayed something important, wouldn't it be our fault?" He wasn't confident at all. However, he made it sound so dignified. Otherwise, how could he be the emperor? The word official could be said in any way. Although he understood this, Lu De definitely wouldn't expose him. This was a slap to the emperor's face. Unless he didn't want to live anymore, he definitely wouldn't do it. Not only that, he also pretended to be very understanding. Your Majesty is wise. The Duke of Loyalty's situation isn't something we can know about immediately. Perhaps he's facing some difficulties. Seeing Lu De on the right track, Zhu Qizhen was naturally very happy. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Beloved official Lu is still the one who understands us." That's right. Does the Jiaoji diplomatic corps have any other explanation? Clearly, Zhu Qizhen was trying to think of another way by asking this question. After all, he couldn't guarantee that the imperial edict would be able to persuade Yang Qindong. He wanted to think of a solution from the weakened Jiaoji diplomatic corps. Lu De understood Zhu Qizhen's intentions and had a troubled expression. "I'm afraid that won't work. If the Duke of Loyalty doesn't withdraw his troops, Jiaoji can't even take care of itself. How can they help us?" "Is that so?" "That's true." Zhu Qizhen nodded and didn't say anything else. Lu De, who was standing below, was secretly discussing Zhu Qizhen's fantasy. He didn't have 100% confidence in making Yang Qindong withdraw his troops from Jiaoji. Yet, he still wanted Jiaoji to send troops to help him deal with the rebellious Min royal lineage. He wanted to take all the good things in the world. How could that be possible? Not to mention that Lu De really didn't have any way to persuade the Jiaoji army. Even if he did, he wouldn't help. He couldn't wait for Yang Qindong to be unlucky. Now that he had finally found an opportunity, how could he take the initiative to retreat? As the saying goes, one should take action when one should. Seeing Zhu Qizhen hesitate, Lu De hardened his heart and decided to add fuel to the fire. However, if he did so, the hatred between him and Yang Chendong would be irreconcilable. But unless that was the case, he would have to lower his head to Yang Chendong. For Lu De, the Minister of Rites, to lower his head to a junior was too embarrassing. That would be no different from killing him. After making the decision to offend Yang Chendong to the end, Lu De saw Zhu Qizhen's silence and spoke again. Your Majesty, it's actually not impossible to persuade the Duke of Loyalty. Zhu Qizhen was still thinking about how to use the current situation to obtain the best advantage for himself when he suddenly heard Lu De's words. Beloved official Lu, you say you have a way. What is it? Your Majesty, there is a way. However, if we do this, it will inevitably draw the displeasure of the Duke of Loyalty. However, compared to resolving the King of Min's rebellion and restoring the Southern Ming Empire's clarity, one person's honor and disgrace are nothing. In short, we will have to ask your Majesty to make a decision. Lu De didn't directly state the method. Instead, he had a troubled expression on his face. He wanted to do his best to distance himself from the matter. Zhu Qizhen didn't think so much. He only wanted to solve the problem. Thus, he looked at Lu De with an urging expression. Beloved official Lu, if you have an idea, just say it. Whether it will work or not, we will make the decision. Yes. Lu De hurriedly agreed and then said, Your Majesty, from what this official knows, the Duke of Loyalty has an extremely good relationship with his fourth brother. This person is now in Fujian's Jianghu prefecture. If we can persuade this person, I think the Duke of Loyalty will have to withdraw his troops for the sake of kinship. However, in this way, it is inevitable that he will have resentment. Lu De didn't say much after that. He believed that Zhu Qizhen must have understood his hint. To put it bluntly, it was to use Yang Chendong's fourth brother as a hostage to blackmail him. Although this method was not open and aboveboard, compared to getting everything, it was worth it. Zhu Qizhen did understand Lu De's meaning, but he didn't immediately make a decision. Of course, he knew that once he did so, it was tantamount to offending Yang Chendong to death. Yang Chendong was not an outsider. If it were any other of his subjects, Zhu Qizhen would not even hesitate to issue an edict to arrest the person immediately. However, Yang Chendong now had a large number of troops in his hands. If he really pushed him to the edge and pushed him to the King of Min's side, wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? Wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? If he couldn't achieve his goal after being the bad guy, then he would be asking for trouble. Chapter 505. This. Is the relationship between the Duke of Zhongdong and his fourth brother really that good? Zhu Qizhen, who couldn't make a decision immediately, asked tentatively. This subject has done my research. The Duke of Zhongdong's fourth brother, Yang, is the only person who will follow the Duke of Zhongdong back to the ancestral home to pay respects. If their relationship isn't good, I'm afraid they won't go together. This subject also heard that Yang was originally going to follow the Duke of Zhongdong and was allowed to. However, for some reason, he was left behind. This should be for his safety. Since this is the case, it can be used to prove that the relationship between the two brothers is really good. Is there such a thing? Zhu Qizhen sat on the high seat and stared at Lu De. If it was just a casual suggestion from Lu De, he would have thought that it was just a casual suggestion. However, now that he heard that Lu De had investigated this matter so deeply, only a fool would believe that it was all an accident. There was only one answer. Lu De had been planning for this for a long time. When he thought of the various conflicts between Lu De and Yang Chendong, Zhu Qizhen understood that Lu De wanted to use his hand to stop Yang Chendong from becoming powerful. The officials would often play some battles and schemes with each other. As the emperor, there were many things that he was well aware of. However, sometimes he would stop them or even expose them. However, sometimes he would act as if nothing had happened. Whatever decision the emperor made, it all depended on whether the goal of the struggle between the officials was beneficial to the emperor's power. Zhu Qizhan saw through Lu Da's thoughts, but he didn't have the intention to expose it. He also didn't want to see Yang Chendong becoming powerful. Since Lu Da's attitude and goal were the same as his, why not do it in passing? After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhan nodded, "Beloved official Lu is right. Since this is the case, this subject will send the embroidered uniform guards to Jianghu Prefecture to invite that person called Yang Yang to the capital. After the matter is settled, we will issue a decree to Duke of Zhongdan. No matter what, Jiaoji is still one of the vassal states of our great Ming. It is one of the states that Taizu ordered not to invade. Even if they are willing to give up their title of Anan and return to the embrace of our great Ming, we should accept them with a benevolent heart." Zhu Qizhan finally made up his mind. Lu Da breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he had a new worry. After this matter was done, once the news spread, he was afraid that the other party would hate him to the bone. Unless Yang Chendong was suppressed by the Great Ming Empire in the future, once the Great Ming Empire's power rose, it might be Yang Chendong's bad luck. As for whether or not the news would spread, not long after Lu Digang walked out of the imperial palace, under Zhu Qizhan's indication, the head eunuch Chao Jixiang spread the news. As soon as Lu Da returned to his residence, his subordinates told him the news that had just spread from the imperial palace, causing him to almost spit out a mouthful of blood. His expression was extremely ugly as he looked in the direction of the imperial palace. Lu Da could not help but curse in his heart, "Your Majesty, even if you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, you shouldn't be so quick to do it. It seems that in the future, if there is him, there will be no Yang Chendong. If there is Yang Chendong, there will be no him." In Nanjing City, the matter of how to deal with Jiaoji was still slowly being discussed, and the relevant matters were also slowly progressing. In front of the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi City, arrows were already drawn and bows were drawn. A great battle was about to break out. Banners fluttered in the wind, war drums thundered, and a dark mass of soldiers stood at the foot of the city. Killing intent swept through the heavens and the earth, causing those who were brave to tremble uncontrollably. The moment the sky brightened, in front of the east gate of Hanoi City, the two armies stood in formation on the vast land. 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers dressed in plain clothes and gray armor stood in dozens of square formations. The square formations, with their banners fluttering high in the air, looked even more majestic and majestic. On the other side, 2,800 mercenaries dressed in camouflage uniforms stood in two rows in a long snake formation. Their advanced firearms and steel knives were all drawn, giving off a killing intent. The difference was that the mercenaries did not raise any banners. This was also Yang Chendong's idea. Before he confirmed his position, he did not plan on letting his mercenaries raise any banners. It was precisely because there were no flags flying that the nearly 3,000 mercenaries looked like a huge green snake hibernating there from afar. They seemed to be moving, yet they were still, causing others to not dare to underestimate them. Just in terms of numbers, the Jiaoji army appeared more imposing, not to mention the 20 large catapults that had been set up at the back of the formation. These catapults could throw boulders weighing almost 100 kilograms into the air. The furthest they could reach was more than 500 meters. They could be said to be the cold weapon with the longest range. Behind them were the catapults that could attack from afar. At the front of the formation was 1,000-men iron shield formation. With these, they could block the enemy's firearms. With sufficient preparation, General Yuan Gengwang's face was filled with confidence. The war horn had been blown, but Yuan Gengwang did not immediately give the order to attack. Instead, he turned his head to look at the top of the Hanoi city wall. When he saw Crown Prince Li Yuanlong and the others standing there and looking down, he felt the blood in his body flowing quickly. He was so excited that he pulled out the sword at his waist, pointed it forward and shouted, "Advance! Advance!" The 1,000-man iron shield formation at the very front quickly changed its formation from a square to a horizontal line. Soon, it formed a huge dragon, walking at the very front of the formation. Normal shields were made of wood and iron. In the cold weapon era, they could defend against bows and arrows, but not bullets. A pure iron shield would be able to defend against long-range bullets, but it would have a lot of flaws. Even if they were raised for a short period of time, they would consume a lot of energy. Moreover, they would be inflexible and difficult to move with the army. Despite knowing these flaws and advantages, Huan Gengwang had no choice but to rely on them. In the first place, he didn't intend to use these shields to attack. He only needed them to protect his soldiers as they continued to advance. When they reached the range where they could start charging, he didn't believe that the enemy's muskets would be able to kill many people if 20,000 of them pressed forward at once. Under Huan Gengwang's orders, the 1,000 iron shield soldiers moved forward slowly. The other 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers hid behind them. Several square formations merged into one and moved forward slowly. Advance! 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 With every step the army took, an earth-shattering shout could be heard. It was quite impressive and gave people a sense of awe. Damn, looks like these are elite soldiers. Company Commander Tian Su, who had received the mission of being the first to attack, could not help but snort when he saw the enemy 3 miles away slowly moving towards him. Those who could become members of the Cold Vanguard were all proud. Those who could become a company commander were even more proud. It was rare for him to take anyone seriously. Now, the Jiaoji army was actually moving forward as though there was no one around them. In Tian Su's eyes, this was a form of provocation. If it were not for the fact that they were 1,000 meters away, he would have taught them a lesson with the 9-5 style. The Jiaoji army was still moving forward. The word advance kept coming out of their mouths. Gradually, they reached a peak. They were like a volcano that could erupt at any time. Once it reached a certain temperature, it would come rolling in. In comparison, the 7 battalions of the Cold Vanguard stood motionless on the ground. They were like huge rocks that were fixed to the ground. They were not affected by the wind and rain at all. "Huh, did you see that? The enemy is afraid." Huan Gengwang, who was riding on his horse, laughed out loud when he saw that the mercenaries were still motionless even though they had already moved 500 meters forward. In his opinion, the mercenaries were only motionless because they couldn't do anything. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stared intently at the scene in front of him from the top of the Hanoi city tower behind him. Although the troops were already far away and he could no longer see clearly, he could still clearly see that the mercenaries were not moving. Seeing that his army was moving forward and the enemy was not moving at all, he could not help but ask the generals beside him, "Generals, what do you think the mercenaries are doing?" The one standing closest to Li Yuanlong was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. Compared to the other generals who were all smiling, his expression was more serious. When he heard the crown prince's question, he replied naturally, "The enemy is clearly using inaction to counter the enemy. To be honest, this kind of steadiness is something that our army cannot achieve." Just as Fan Yuhai finished speaking, another general, Li Shaozhong, could not help but say, "General Fan, why do you have to raise the morale of others and lower your own? It is obvious that the mercenaries are scared by our army and do not dare to move." Li Shaozhong was a member of the Li clan. Now that the Li clan was powerful in Jiaoji, his status as a general had also risen. When Fan Yuhai heard Li Shaozhong's words, he did not try to argue with him. The generals on the battlefield were not like those civil officials who cared about words. They cared more about results. Before the results were out, it was hard to tell who was right and who was wrong. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong also did not say anything. Instead, he stared at everything in front of him with interest. He wanted to see how the powerful mercenaries would deal with the Jiaoji army that outnumbered them by several times. At the front of the battlefield, the distance between the two sides was rapidly shrinking. From the initial 3 li, it was now less than 700 meters. Even so, the word advance was still echoing in the air. The Jiaoji army's momentum was getting stronger and stronger. Prepare your grenades. Shields my ass. In a moment, I will let them know what it means to lift a rock and smash it on their own feet. Facing the approaching enemy, Tian Su did not show a trace of fear. On the contrary, he gave an unquestionable military order to the soldiers below. Then, he took down the 95 style from his body and stood in a standing position, ready to shoot. Chapter 506. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was in the middle of the troops. Seeing the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers closing in, his expression did not change. If one looked closely, one could see a trace of disapproval in his eyes. It wasn't because Kong Chuanxin was careless. Before he came, Yang Chendong had talked to him and told him about the iron shield that was being built in Hanoi City. This was all thanks to the Security Bureau. After being injected with large amounts of gold and silver, the Security Bureau had developed so quickly that they had already infiltrated the countries that they were pretending to be enemies with. Once there was any movement, they would immediately spread the news so that the main force of the mercenaries could make the most accurate decision. As someone who came later, no one knew better than him the importance of intelligence. Later on, people said that victory in a war depended on the source of military intelligence. Some people even said that 70% intelligence and 30% battle. This showed the importance of military intelligence to an army. It was because he was prepared that Yang Chendong told Kong Chuanxin about the Jiaoji army building the iron chariots when Kong Chuanxin was about to lead the army into battle. Not only that, he also came up with a countermeasure. The advantage of the steel shields was their sturdiness. They could indeed effectively block flying bullets. However, their weaknesses were even more obvious. For example, they were slow and inflexible. With these shortcomings, it was naturally very easy to deal with them. All they needed to do was throw a series of grenades, and it would be like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. In this way, unless the place was very narrow, facing the fragments of the explosion in all directions, even an iron shield would be useless. As for the steel chariots? Regardless of whether it was a rocket launcher or a 4-0 flame, they would all be easy targets. Thinking about the battlefield in the future, even mobile tanks were afraid of rocket launchers, not to mention the clumsy steel chariots that relied on their legs to move. Kong Chuanxin, who had received the news ahead of time, didn't show the slightest hint of panic when he saw Iron Shield approaching him step by step. The only thing he was worried about now was whether Tian Su could keep the situation under control. After all, there was a limit to how far a grenade could be thrown. Whether or not the mercenaries at the front could withstand the pressure from the Jiaoji army and strike at the most appropriate time was the most important factor in this first battle. Tian Su was the company commander of Company 1, and was the subordinate that Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin valued the most. As the mercenary group continued to expand, the number of mid-level officers needed also increased. Promoting new recruits was something that Yang Chendong had always advocated. Under what circumstances would one be able to tell if a person's military talent was worthy of being entrusted with important tasks? Without a doubt, war was the best battlefield and way to test a commander. Kong Chuanxin wanted to test the ability of the company commander of heavenly strategies, so he didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just watched everything from the perspective of a bystander. Of course, if heavenly policy was really useless, then the second company commander, third company commander, and fourth company commander could replace him at any time. This was also something Kong Chuanxin had prepared behind the back of the heavenly policy. He believed that even if the company commander of heavenly strategies found out about this, he wouldn't be dissatisfied. After all, the situation on the battlefield was always ever-changing. A commander who didn't leave any room for maneuver was the most unprofessional. How would the company commander of heavenly strategies know about this? After ordering a company of subordinates and a battalion of auxiliary soldiers to prepare grenades, he raised his Type 95 and fired a shot at the Jianghu soldiers in front of him. Bah! The sound of the gunshot was extremely crisp. The bullet flew out of the barrel of the gun and hit a Jianghu soldier's shield according to Heavenly Strategy's plan. Under the sound of the iron weapons colliding, an even more crisp sound of collision was produced. When the gunshot rang out, Yuan Gengwang's eyes widened. His expression was somewhat unnatural. Although the Crown Prince had said that these shields were made of pure metal and that firearms shouldn't be able to penetrate them, he still lacked confidence because he hadn't tested it before. When the gunshot rang out, his entire body tensed up. All of this lasted until the bullet hit the metal shield and produced a spark. Only then did he heave a huge sigh of relief. Then, he pointed to the front with a smile and said to his subordinates, "Do you see that? The opponent's firearms are useless against us." Ha ha ha. The group of subordinates also laughed loudly as if they were in agreement. Previously, they were indeed a little nervous. Although they took the initiative to attack, their morale was astonishing. However, before they encountered firearms, they really didn't have confidence in their hearts. Now, it was all good. The truth allowed them to relax. Not only the generals, but the soldiers below Yeshen were also frightened by this shot. However, when they saw that the troops in front of them didn't show any signs of chaos or uneasiness, these people also let go of their courage. When they shouted the word, "Advance," their voices were much louder and their speed was much faster. As expected, it's made of pure metal. Amazing! After firing the shot, Heavenly Strategies retracted the Type 95 and shook his head. Although he looked a little disappointed, he wasn't afraid at all. Obviously, this result was within his expectations. The two troops were still closing in on each other rapidly. 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, as they got closer and closer, both troops could clearly see each other's formation. A tense atmosphere began to spread. The emotions of war and killing were quickly condensed and focused. 150 meters, 130 meters, 100 meters, at such a distance, both sides could already see each other's figures and appearances. The archers of the Jianghu army who were hiding behind the metal shields also prepared to fire their arrows. There were a total of 2,000 archers. One could imagine that if they didn't stop them, arrows would rain down from the sky. "Comrades, charge for 30 meters. Drop the bombs and shoot." His gaze was fixed on the enemy's every move. When he saw that the enemy was about to make the first move, Heavenly Strategies, who had been lazing around all this while, seemed to have changed into a different person. He suddenly roared and led the troops to charge forward. Heavenly Strategies' actions also led the soldiers beside him to charge forward as fast as they could. The Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion, a total of 500 people, charged forward like arrows released from a bow. To the soldiers who had to run 25 kilometers in a day's training, the 30-meter distance was a sprint. In just a few seconds, they had crossed the required distance. Then, 500 grenades were tossed forward like rain. Under the 30-meter standing run, the flying speed of the grenades was much further than before. Basically, each grenade was thrown a distance of more than 60 meters. Under such superposition, the distance of 100 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Before the Jianghu army could react, including the 2,000 archers, they had just knocked their bows. Before they could release their arrows, the grenades that filled the sky rained down on their heads. What the hell is this? Many of the Jianghu army instinctively had this question in their minds. However, just as this thought formed in their minds, the grenades that were thrown at them had already exploded above their heads, beside them, and under their feet. Boom boom boom, the ground trembled and shrapnel flew everywhere. Flames rose and smoke lingered in the air. Following these sudden changes, the formation of the 1,000 iron shield bearers at the front of the Jianghu army finally loosened. These iron shield bearers were originally holding heavy shields. After walking for nearly 3 miles, they were already exhausted. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and shockwave around them. It was mainly due to the various fragments attacking them. They were completely unprepared and were struck dumb in an instant. They only wanted to defend against the firearms in front of them. They did not expect such powerful explosives to suddenly explode beside them. The iron shield bearers, who seemed to have the tightest defense, were the first to collapse. The 2,000 archers who stood behind them in the second row also fell into chaos. The advantage of archers was that they could kill their enemies from a long distance. However, their disadvantage was also very obvious. Once they lost their protective barrier, their chest would be completely exposed to the enemy. There was no way to defend themselves at all. Needless to say, the explosions of the grenades were right above their heads. Who knew how many archers were killed or maimed by the power of the grenades? After a row of iron shield bearers and 2 rows of archers were defeated, the entire Jianghu army was in chaos. Surrounded by explosions and smoke, they did not even know what to do next. The Jianghu army was stunned and their formation was in chaos. The mercenaries didn't panic. After throwing out the grenades, they started shooting with their guns. 500 people against 20,000 enemies. There was no need for them to aim. All they needed to do was to adjust the Type 95 and Type 81 assault rifles into continuous firing mode. Da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Bullets continued to spray out from the muzzles of the guns, shooting towards the Jianghu soldiers opposite them. Every time the machine guns fired, a group of Jianghu army would fall to the ground. They did not understand the situation and did not know what was going on. Many of them fell to the ground with unknown emotions. Some of the Jianghu army soldiers who were lucky enough not to be hit by the bullets turned around and ran. When people encounter danger, they will have an instinct. This instinct is to turn around and run away. Unless there was something even more terrifying happening behind them, they would run until they could not run anymore. Chapter 507. The initial moment was terrifying. There was nothing more pitiful than a group of panicking defeated soldiers. They scrambled to retreat. They shouted and ran, and many of them fell down. The Jianghu soldiers who were shot didn't know what they were doing. They just instinctively retreated to the open city gate behind them. General Wuan was in the middle of the army. Riding on a horse, he could see further than ordinary people. Naturally, he knew what had happened. The sudden explosion of the grenade was beyond his expectations. He had a bad feeling when he saw a large number of Iron Shield soldiers fall to the ground. However, before he could give the order, the entire army fell into chaos. Hold on. Charge forward. They have fewer people than us. As long as we charge forward, we can win. He shouted as he swung his sword at the retreating soldiers. He wanted to use this method to stop the army from retreating. However, under the fear of death, how many people would listen to his words? How many people would listen to him? But how many people would listen to it and take it to heart? The tide of retreating soldiers couldn't be stopped. Even though Wuan had killed 4 to 5 retreating Jianghu soldiers, he couldn't reverse the situation. Not only that, Wuan, who was swinging his sword, became Tian Su's target. Riding on a horse and being higher than everyone else was a privilege of a general. However, at the same time, it was inevitable that he would become a conspicuous target. Tian Su targeted him. He held the 95 style firmly with both hands and raised the gun in a half-kneeling position. He adjusted his breathing and aimed between 3 points and 1 line. His finger gently touched the trigger of the gun. Then, his shoulder shook. That was the recoil of the bullet. Bang! Bang! In the chaos, no one paid attention to the 2 gunshots. However, after the first gunshot missed the target, the second gunshot hit the target. Wuan, who was still swinging his sword and yelling at the retreating soldiers, felt a pain in his chest. Then, his breathing became hurried. His body swayed a little on the horse before he lost the strength to hold onto it and fell from the horse. Once a person fell, the consequences would be very serious. Ruan Gengwang, who had been shot, would not have died immediately. However, when he fell to the ground, countless feet stepped on his body. Not only did he not have a single breath left, but his entire face had also changed. At that moment, he was completely trampled to death. When Ruan Gengwang fell off his horse and died, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaozhi soldiers had completely retreated. Without anyone stopping them, the Jiaozhi soldiers were running wildly. Less than 100 meters behind them, 500 mercenaries with guns were chasing after them, killing the last few Jiaozhi soldiers who were running away. This seemed to have become a death sentence. The speed of the fleeing soldiers chasing after Qiu Jiaozhi became slower and slower. They were all afraid that if they were too slow, they would fall behind and be killed. Because of this, stampedes occurred from time to time. No matter who it was, once they lost their balance and fell to the ground, they would not be able to escape the tragic fate of being trampled to death. Behind the Heavenly Strategies Company commander, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin saw that the overall situation was settled and immediately shouted to the 3 trumpeters who had been waiting for a long time, "Blow the bugle, everyone attack." Beep 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 beep, the loud and refreshing bugle call sounded. Over 3,000 mercenaries gave a shout and charged forward. They maintained a platoon formation and tried their best to charge forward as fast as possible. The situation in front of them seemed to be telling them that if they were late by one step, who knew how many military merits they would lose. Compared to the full charge of the mercenaries, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong staggered on the city tower of Hanoi City. If it were not for the captain of the guards who supported him, he would have fallen to the ground. Defeated, defeated. Li Yuanlong had just stabilized himself when he muttered to himself, "Defeated, defeated. Your Highness, please close the city gates immediately." General Fan Yuhai's expression was also very ugly. Fortunately, he had led troops for many years and was not as weak as the Crown Prince. "I agree." The other general, Huang Hua, also cupped his fist and said with his head lowered. Clearly, he could see that if this continued, the defeated Ruan Gengwang's troops would very likely attract the mercenaries into the city. Hearing the 2 generals express the same opinion, Li Yuanlong's face flashed with a hint of struggle. However, he quickly made a decision. He gritted his teeth and said, "Pass down this Crown Prince's order, close the city gates." With this order, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaozhi soldiers outside the city had completely given up. Ruan Gengwang was dead and his subordinates were running like headless flies. They only hoped to enter Hanoi City as soon as possible and save their lives. However, what they saw next was the scene of the eastern city gate closing from the inside. Unpleasant creaking sounds came from the thick and heavy city gate as it rapidly closed. No! Seeing that their only escape route was about to be sealed. At least 10,000 Jiaozhi soldiers' eyes turned red. Some people's eyes were filled with despair. Some people ran faster, hoping to rush into the city at the last moment. There were also people who ran towards the empty trebuchet. Then, everyone worked together to change the direction of the heavy trebuchet. Since they have already abandoned us, then don't blame us for using our own methods to fight back. A somewhat famous Chiliarch yelled and ordered the soldiers under him to put the huge rocks into the trebuchet. The trebuchet began to bombard Hanoi City behind them. As he bombarded the trebuchet, the Chiliarch yelled to the approaching mercenaries, "We surrender. We are willing to help you take down Hanoi City and atone for our crimes." With this yell, many Jiaozhi soldiers quickly responded. In order to live, they had to show a stance. "Stop firing." Company Commander Tian Su, who had already reloaded his 4th magazine, saw the change in the situation and immediately stopped the advancing mercenaries. Originally, he wanted to follow behind the Jiaoji soldiers into Hanoi City. This was also the military order he made in front of Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. However, when he saw the city gates close in advance, he became anxious. Although he still had a backup plan, it was still more troublesome. However, when he saw the sudden change in front of him, he suddenly had an idea. Why not use these defeated soldiers to help him take down the city? The 400 people beside him were all treasures. It would be best if he could save one of them. After making up his mind, Tian Su followed the situation and yelled, "Any Jiaoji soldiers who help the mercenaries take down the city will be atoned for their crimes and will not be killed. Anyone who still wants to resist will be killed without mercy." The 400 soldiers who were stopped by Tian Su didn't understand what he was planning. However, when they heard his yell, they all understood. In the following moment, they all followed Tian Su's lead and yelled, "Kill without mercy." Attacking was atoning for their crimes and atoning for their crimes. The Jiaoji soldiers who were already at their wits' end saw a sliver of opportunity before their deaths. How could they not grasp it with all their might? One by one, they ran to the catapults and began to help take down Hanoi City's city gate tower. These catapults were used to prevent the mercenaries from attacking. They were placed very close to Hanoi City's city gate tower, less than 50 meters away. Now that they were being used as tools to take down the city gates, one could imagine how big of a threat they were. When a random boulder was thrown, it actually flew over the city gate tower and landed in Hanoi City. Just this boulder alone was enough to harm countless innocent people in the city. "Bastards, bastards! Release the arrows and kill them." Seeing these defeated soldiers helping the mercenaries against him, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expression turned ugly as he yelled at the top of his lungs. The Crown Prince had given the order. Although he knew that the people below were soldiers of his own country, seeing them throw boulders into the city and injure countless people, Fan Yuhai, Huang Hua and the other generals gritted their teeth and ordered fiercely, "Fire the arrows." After a few breaths, arrows rained down. For a moment, the battle outside the city was very lively. On the contrary, Commander Tian Su and the others who were following behind became less anxious. "Commander, should we lend a hand?" A platoon leader of the Lengfeng platoon couldn't help but ask when he saw the Jiaoji soldiers fighting with their own people so fiercely. "There's no need to hurry. Let's wait until their morale is low before we make a move." Not only did Tian Su speak unhurriedly, he even sat down on the ground to take a good rest during the battle. With Commander Tian Su taking the lead, the other 500 mercenaries also sat down on the ground. Each of them hugged their guns and looked at the lively scene 200 meters away, occasionally pointing at it. By the time Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin arrived with his main force, this was the scene that greeted him. However, Kong Chuanxin didn't have any intention of reprimanding Tian Su. Perhaps he had the same thought. Therefore, he ordered his troops to take advantage of this time to take a good rest while calling someone to call Tian Su over. "That battle just now was pretty good. You showed the might of the Lengfeng platoon. What do you plan to do next?" Kong Chuanxin asked as he pointed at the flat ground beside him, indicating that Tian Su could sit down. Of course, Kong Chuanxin knew what to do. However, he still asked because he wanted to test Tian Su. As the mercenary army continued to grow, the ranks and structure of the troops also increased. It was only a matter of time before someone like him, who had military achievements and experience, rose to the top. However, if he wanted to secure a high position, it would depend on whether he had capable subordinates. Clearly, at this moment, he was nurturing Tian Su as a trusted aide. Chapter 508. In front of Kong Chuanxin, Tian Su wasn't that restrained. After all, Kong Chuanxin was his squad leader when he first joined Lengfeng. When he became a squad leader, Kong Chuanxin was also his platoon leader. Along the way, he had a battalion commander and a company commander. Battalion commander, what I mean is that we should wait until they've exhausted most of their forces. Once they're tired, we'll blast open the east gate and take the opportunity to charge in. Tian Su said casually. This was part of the battle plan from before. During the meeting yesterday, Kong Chuanxin had said that if it was possible, they should attack Hanoi City today. If the conditions weren't right, then they would wait for the right opportunity. Although that was what he said, everyone who attended the meeting knew that the battalion commander was going to make a decision to make a great contribution. Unless the conditions were really unsuitable, the invasion of Hanoi City today was a fact that was set in stone. Aren't we being a little too hasty? Kong Chuanxin asked worriedly after hearing Tian Su's reply. According to the intelligence, there are 80,000 Jiaoji soldiers in the city. In addition, there are many high-ranking officials and nobles in the city. I'm afraid there are at least 10,000 of them in total. If we include the conscripts in the city, then there will be 100,000 soldiers. Even though we can eliminate 20,000 of them, there will still be a lot left. Attacking a country's capital with less than 3,000 people? Moreover, the enemy had already made some preparations for defense. Such a thing sounded like a joke. However, it was a completely different story when the same thing happened to the mercenaries. With their excellent military quality, excellent physical fitness, and most importantly, excellent weapons and equipment, it was normal for them to win a battle with a small number of people. Therefore, Kong Chuanxin wasn't worried about whether they could attack the city. Instead, he was worried about whether they could gain a foothold after entering the city. If they went in first and were chased out, then it would be really embarrassing. When the sixth young master arrived with the main force of the army, wouldn't they be too ashamed to meet him? Tian Su naturally understood this as well. Therefore, he nodded in agreement. Then, he said, "Battalion commander, riches and honor are found in danger. This time, you finally have the opportunity to lead the team alone. It would be a pity if you don't fight for it." Moreover, once they suddenly entered the city, the Jiaoji soldiers would definitely not be on guard, and the good stuff would not be transferred too much. That was a large batch of spoils of war. How much merit would that be? Presumably, the sixth young master would be very satisfied when he saw it. As for what will happen after we enter the city, we can just take it slow and steady. If it doesn't work, we can just burn down all the dangerous buildings in front of us. As long as the Jiaoji soldiers can't get close to us, they can't do anything to us. When the time comes, it will be time for us to use our guns to kill them one by one. Burn houses? Are you going to burn down the houses too? Hearing this idea, Kong Chuanxin's eyes lit up. However, when he thought about how the sixth young master often said that he wanted to get along well with the people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Seeing Kong Chuanxin's worry, Tian Su chuckled and said, "Battalion commander, the sixth young master is a kind person. It makes sense for him to advocate for unity and building good relations with the people. However, we are not facing the Han people, but the people of Jiaoji. Perhaps there are kind people among them, but most of them are still hostile to us. Moreover, a general success is built on 10,000 years of withered bones. At this time, we can't have the slightest bit of kindness. Otherwise, we will be harming our own brothers." Tian Su's words were very reasonable. On the battlefield, only victory mattered. Only by winning would they be able to gain the initiative. Even if you want to benefit the people, Yes Hen has to have the final say. Otherwise, if you can't even protect your own life, how can you talk about protecting the interests of others? After hearing this, Kong Chuanxin finally made a decision. He wasn't an indecisive person to begin with. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the battalion commander of Lengfeng. Alright, since that's the case, then let's rest for a while. When they are almost done fighting, we will make our move. Oh right, prepare the weapons to break the city gate. We will see your performance later. With Kong Chuanxin's order, Tian Su changed from his seat to a standing position. He gave a standard military salute and said, "Rest assured, battalion commander. We will complete our mission." Crown Prince Li Yuanlong didn't know what the mercenaries were going to do next. He had already retreated from the East City Tower. After all, the catapults didn't have eyes. Who knew when they would land on his head? If he was hit, wouldn't he die with no one to seek justice? Other than Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, there was also the famous General Fan Yuhai and another general surnamed Li Xiaozhong. After they followed the Crown Prince back to the palace, they discussed what to do next. "Your Highness, don't worry. Today's battle was all Wuan Gengwang's fault. He underestimated the enemy and advanced prematurely, which led to his defeat. As long as we defend the city gate, the mercenaries won't be able to gain any advantage with our advantage in numbers." Li Xiaozhong was the first to step forward. He was comforting the Crown Prince, but he was also expressing his opinion on this battle. "That's right, that's right." The other generals nodded in agreement, seemingly agreeing with Li Xiaozhong's words. Who was the Crown Prince? Wuan Gengwang was the Crown Prince of a country. If nothing unexpected happened, he would be the future king. Nothing must happen to him. Even if something happened, it would be because his subordinates didn't understand the Crown Prince's intentions and didn't do a good job. If the battle was lost, someone had to be the scapegoat. Wuan Gengwang, who died on the battlefield, became the scapegoat. Although the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong couldn't bear it, he had to make this decision for the sake of the overall situation. Alright, since everyone has the same opinion, then this matter is settled. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening, we still need to mobilize the troops. General Fan, I'll have to trouble you with this matter. Li Yuanlong nodded helplessly and handed over the battle to the famous General Fan Yuhai. This general has received the order. Fan Yuhai cupped his fists and left the hall. There was no time to lose. For the sake of Hanoi's safety, some things couldn't be delayed and had to be done immediately. After Fan Yuhai left, Li Yuanlong discussed with the generals what to do next while waiting for news of the battle at the East Gate to end. At the East Gate, after the Crown Prince left, all battle matters were handed over to General Huang Hua. General Huang wasn't in a hurry when he saw the huge rocks blocking the city. He first sent people to evacuate some of the commoners near the eastern city gate while continuously ordering the archers to shoot down arrows from the top of the city gate tower. Compared to the cumbersome catapults, the archers were much more agile. In addition, they were on high ground, so they were unstoppable. In just an hour, they killed thousands of Jiaozhi soldiers. They also threw down many rocks and wooden sleepers from below the city tower, destroying 10 catapults below. Without the catapults, the Jiaozhi soldiers' attack power was completely weakened. They didn't even have many bows and arrows in their hands, so they became live targets with nowhere to hide. Seeing more and more of their brothers die, some of the Jiaozhi soldiers turned around and ran toward the mercenaries. When they were 300 meters away, they threw down their weapons and knelt down to surrender. Everyone had the desire to live. Seeing that there was no way out, they could only turn around and beg for mercy. Although they were uneasy and didn't know how the mercenaries would deal with them, there was still some hope for them to try. It was much better than waiting outside the city as a target. Go to a camp of temporary auxiliary soldiers and confiscate their weapons. Tie them up with ropes. Camp Commander Kong Chuanshin waved his hand and 400 temporary auxiliary soldiers rushed forward. They surrounded the Jiaozhi soldiers who had already surrendered and lost their will to fight. Speaking of which, there were at least 7,000 Jiaozhi soldiers who were still alive. The ratio of 400 people surrounding 7,000 people didn't seem to be harmonious. However, on the battlefield, such things happened frequently. When facing a group of defeated soldiers, especially those who had lost their will to fight, one only needed to pay a small price to detain them. It was just like when the Japanese army invaded China. 2 Japanese soldiers could detain 2,000 Chinese for tens of li. Thinking about it now, it didn't seem very possible. However, it did happen. It had to be said that when a nation lost their will to fight, it was very sad. After dealing with the 7,000 captives, Chang Tiansu also started to get busy. First, he organized the troops. Then, he called out the 10 soldiers from each platoon. Unlike the other soldiers of the Cold Front, these 10 soldiers, from the squad leader to the vice squad leader to the ordinary soldiers, each carried a large wooden box on their backs. Along the way, they had been switching to carry the boxes, and their speed was not much slower than the other comrades. When they were called out, each of them opened the wooden box skillfully. Then, 5 individual rocket launchers were assembled and placed in each of their hands. His gaze swept across the soldiers. When he saw that they were all filled with fighting spirit, Chang Tiansu nodded in satisfaction. He pointed at the east gate of Hanoi a few hundred meters away and said loudly, "Blast open that gate. Platoon 1 and 2 cover it. Platoon 3 and the auxiliary battalion will charge in when the gate is opened. Anyone who resists, kill without mercy." The order to attack the city was finally given by Chang Tiansu. A total of 500 mercenaries puffed out their chests and shouted in unison. They then turned around and began to move towards the east gate of Hanoi City in rows. On the east gate, General Huang Hua was commanding the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.